All right, we've got our next team coming up. They are going to be talking about probing the relationship between Twitter disinformation and news discourse. If you could each introduce yourselves before you guys start, that'd be great.
Hi, I'm Ioana Pavlidou. I'm doing my PhD at the Hong Kong Polytechnic University, where I study the geographical and cultural disparities in online crowdfunding industry.
Hi, my name is Zhifan Luo. I'm a PhD candidate of sociology at University at Albany.
Hi, I'm Elena Leonchuk, and I'm a postdoctoral scholar at North Carolina State University Department of Psychology, and I do evaluation of science, technology, partnership, and programs.
And I am Jonathan Schlosser. I am a PhD candidate at UNC Chapel Hill. I specifically study disinformation on social media and its effect on public discourse, particularly around politics and social issues. So today we will be presenting our project, which was titled Probing the Relationships Between Twitter Disinformation and News Discourse. So our intro, we ended up sourcing two data sets. One was from Twitter and was the actual release of IRA-related tweets and accounts. So that original Twitter data set contained over 10 million tweet data points and over 3,800 accounts. The second data set that we used to sort of probe our questions and relationships was a Twitter data set collected by a researcher that was made publicly available through Data World, which if you've never used before, I highly recommend as a site for collecting data. And it was the posts on Facebook from top 15 news agencies, including like ABC, BBC, CBS, Huffington Post, Wall Street Journal, Time, and there were also some interesting ones like Fox and Friends. So with this data set, what we ended up doing was basically conducting an initial exploration of the two data sets. We were looking for the major topics in the two data sets and how these two sort of sources of data, which represented disinformation actors and news agencies, co-evolved over time. So that was sort of our approach. And this was based on a lot of previous research that's been done on Twitter data and the effects of the IRA campaign, which IRA stands for Internet Research Agency, which if you're not familiar with. But basically, there's been studies looking at how the IRA used different social media platforms, how the IRA trolls organized, how basically the Russian intent to manipulate the 2016 election was conducted and what effect it actually had. So we were pulling on that to sort of lead what we were doing. So our method, and by the way, I'm sorry, I'm going to be talking like a lot throughout this presentation, and that's not because of like my group members like not being able to talk. It's that they just wanted me to talk. They felt more comfortable with it. So I don't want you thinking like, oh, why is nobody else talking? So the method that we ended up doing was we pre-processed and prepared the data, and me and Ioana actually did that largely. So we ended up taking this 2 million tweet data set, which was focused just on English language tweets. So if you remember from earlier, the original data set was 10 million tweets. We cut that down to a little over 2 million. And then we conducted a sample on that because 2 million data points in a structured topic model is a very time-consuming analysis. So we ended up sampling and we took about a fifth of the data set. So we used 400,000. Then for Facebook, the original data set contained 534,000 posts, which we then sampled to get 100,000, again, taking roughly a fifth. We then looked at basic analyses. So we calculated the top words, word frequencies, term frequencies, TF, IDF, and basically made it so we can implement it into a corpus and run our structured topic model. Which we actually ran way more than one to get it working correctly. So the time frame that we specified was the 2012 to 2016 period, leading right up to the election. And then we looked at the results from both data sets. So this was our first image that we sort of generated. And this is looking at the number of social media posts from the IRA, from Twitter, and their evolution over time. So the Twitter data set originally started in there were a couple tweets from 2010, but it really started in about 2012. But what is fascinating is that in 2014, around August, there's this massive spike in disinformation tweets, especially in English. So we sort of were questioning that. We're like, what's going on there? You know, what happened in 2014 that caused this? It turns out, with a little bit more research, that was actually the first Russian disinformation campaign targeted at Ukraine. It was used to sow sort of differing opinions in Ukraine and create and play into the hostility of the Ukrainian unrest. So, yeah. Then we looked at that and we thought that was really interesting. And then we started looking at top words. And we found a lot of top words that you would sort of expect from a politically targeted campaign, right? So news, politics, Trump, Obama, and some other ones that we weren't quite expecting to be in that data set, which are like police, Chicago. I think violence was one that we saw a little bit. Black Lives Matter came up a lot. And looking at other studies of this as well, we found that other researchers also found the same prevalence of that topic, or of those topics. So with background research and considering what was going on there, we actually put together that a lot of this was played to divisive topics in the US to sort of manipulate discourse and affect the way that people viewed these issues. Oops, sorry about that. Okay. So then we did the same thing with Facebook and looked at the top words. And we found that these news articles were more focused on political actors. So Trump, Obama, Clinton are much higher. Police, Donald, of course, from Donald Trump. But still we see shooting and things coming up also, which was interesting. So, by the way, team members, if you have anything to add at any time throughout this, just let me know. So then we continued our analysis and started to look at sentiment. So we found the frequency of negative words in the tweets. And we found that, again, by 2014, there's this massive spike in negative words, which makes sense because if they're playing on these negative sort of ideas used to cause division amongst populations, negativity is a great way to do that. You know, and if you have any background in psychology, negative things have a greater impact than positive. So it makes sense. Then we looked at positive sentiment just to balance out that analysis. And we also see this massive spike. I think that comes from that mass production of tweets during that time frame. So again, they're playing towards negative and positive, which has been confirmed by other analyses as well. So this is actually really interesting and should be probed more fully. I'm personally really curious, and then talking to some of my group members about what words were particularly being used during this time that triggered positivity and triggered negativity. In our analysis, we used the AFIN sort of technique of just doing a basic sentiment analysis. So there's a lot of room for improvement here, and a lot more questions that come up than necessarily answers. So then we went into our topic modeling. We went through the process of choosing our N for our topics. We decided not to put those graphs up, but if you want, we have them. We decided to go with around 30, actually specifically 30 topics for both the Twitter set and the news set. And we were looking at different factors and how these different words were basically coming out and representing topics through our structured topic model. So we actually ended up doing this a couple of different ways just to consider alternatives. So when we were looking at similarity of topics between the two, we actually went through it with our human eye. old school research style, and saw if we noticed any patterns that were just coming out to us intuitively. And then we did a more computational based method by calculating the Jaccard Similarity Index, which is basically a measure that creates ratios between most similar words and most dissimilar words and gives a value. And that value can then be used to see how similar topics are. Yep. So when we created our topic model, we ended up finding this. We created this this graph. But what's interesting is our topic with the highest proportion, it was actually police brutality that we sort of identified as the overarching theme of the words present. So it was like man, policed, killed. I think black was also in that topic. But we also found like more emotional things. We found school shootings, and we found things about like calls to action or methods to diminish action, which makes sense considering that that was Russians' basically prime objective. Then we moved on to Facebook and did the same thing, and we found that elections and GOP topics came up, but we also still saw some of those police shootings and similar things of that nature. So we ended up finding that there were a lot of similarities between the two data sets, but because of how our topic model was addressed and how we did this, there's a lot of room for improvement there. So we're not 100% confident with that connection, but we found initial insights. So then we basically took a couple of topics that we saw that were similar in both data sets and wanted to probe them further. So we looked at elections. So we found topic 23 in Twitter and topic 25 in the news articles. And then we looked at police brutality. So topic 24 in Twitter and topic 10 in the news articles. And we wanted to see how they sort of like co-evolved over time and if they actually went together at all. So this was our first sort of model of the STM. So the first, so the top image shows Russian misinformation on Twitter, and the bottom one shows the news articles on Facebook. And what's really interesting is that in this Facebook data set, there's this peak early on around 2012 that just like diminishes and sort of stays constant after like 2014. There's a little bit of an increase influx down here by 2016, but yeah. And then at the top, we see the Russian misinformation, and we see this massive increase in focus on this topic starting in like late 2014 and just continually increasing up until right before the election, which has been confirmed by other analyses that Black Lives Matter and police brutality was a major talking point for disinformation actors because it was such an emotionally contested and divisive topic in the US during the lead up to the election. So then the second one we focused on was police brutality. Oh, sorry, I misspoke. I was talking about GOP, but whatever. So this is the one that I was mentioning with police brutality, where it increases and it stays relatively constant. I'll actually go back and readdress that because that's a major flaw. Okay, so this is the elections. So this is where it just increases and makes sense because this is it's just talking about the elections. Sorry, I misinterpreted that. Please forgive me. Yeah. And then this is the one with the police brutality where we see it spike and increase right around 2015, 2016, and just scatter. But we also see this massive influx in 2012, and then it drops and levels out around 2016. So basically, disinformation actors started increasing and talking about this while news media diminished. So our overall lessons and sort of like challenges encountered was that identifying our structural topic model and really finessing it to give accurate results is a massive process and takes a lot of thinking through and figuring out and playing with. We also realized that a large portion of our time was spent pre-processing the data and organizing it in a way where we could actually effectively run our analyses and make everything flow the way that we were hoping to. And then we also dealt with like interpersonal issues with within our group, where it's like sharing code and issues of authorship and how to represent that and how to actually manage GitHub. And questions over like of like faith in our model versus actually factually examining it and making sure that works. So then our possible future research directions are to expand this analysis to the full data set, because we thought that there might be some artifacts that come out from the sampling, and there might be clearer things found if we did the full data set. To finesse the structured topic model and make sure that the results that we're being given are clear and as accurate as possible. And then we really want to go into this further and actually like map out the coevolution of these topics and see if we can like run some sort of statistical analysis on those like trend lines to see like what the actual mathematical backing is behind that coevolution, rather than just doing it observationally. And then we would like to explore the sentiment of more broad topics and their evolution over time, and possibly include the parts of the data set that are in Russian or other languages, which actually accounted to 57% of our original data set. So that was our project. And yeah, so I'm actually going to pass it off to my teammates to answer questions. They are like awesome at that, so ask questions and please let them speak, because I'm done talking.
Woo, let's give them a round of applause. Questions.
So this is it's minor. It was really interesting. So you're saying 50%, 57% of your data set was in Russian, or was in just other languages?
So
it was in Russian. There was some tweets coming from, I think, Iran, but that was pretty small percentage. But majority that they said is in Russian, partially because Russia is doing propaganda campaign in Ukraine and Russia, and most people speak Russian there. So there's a whole another area of disinformation to study on that data set.
Right. Do you guys know if there's, and this is not like directly related, but like if there's a way to automate having these kinds of tweets like being sent to Google Translate and just translated automatically? Is there like...
Well, I speak Russian and I've done these things. You could probably automate it, yes, but you know, it depends. Everything depends on the context. Either it's event, it's just some event you're looking for more nuanced kind of information. So yes, but it depends.
Yes, it's actually something we considered first, to like use machine translation to translate everything into English, which can be very interesting. But that idea kind of needs more exploration with that in that direction. And I do see a lot of research began to like test whether it works as well as like just use the native language. And then we are thinking about it because we are trying to understand the correlation between these tweets, Russian tweets, and the news coverage in the United States, which mainly speak English. So we said, okay, maybe it's all right for our project to delete that part of the tweets, which doesn't mean they are not relevant, but just mean we do want to focus just on the English text we have here. But I mean, that's definitely something in my mind, in our minds, yeah.
Thank you.
I'm gonna follow up on that question too. I thought this was really neat. Would a future project? Did you get a chance to look at any of the Russian tweets and see like were any of them propaganda for the U.S. that was still in Russian, or do you imagine that it's all like propaganda that's more Ukraine or Russia focused?
Oh, I'm sure there's lots of propaganda on the Russian side in Russia against U.S. So I may not follow only tweets, but just general news, what's going on in that part of the world, because I'm from Ukraine. So Russians are using different ways to change public opinion of Russian people about the U.S. and things that are happening here. So to answer your question, yes.
Cool, thanks.
So we're actually studying that at the Laboratory for Analytic Sciences, Russian influence campaigns. And one of the things we found was the Russians will go to white supremacist forums first. Yes, to test out their campaigns before they put it on social media. And they'll put out Black Lives Matter or White Lives Matter. They don't care. They just want to see how the public's going to react. So it'll be interesting. We're actually studying how it gets from the white supremacist group to Facebook to Reddit, things like that. So come work with us.
We need to talk afterwards. We definitely need to.
So cool. Very neat. Any other questions?
I was just wondering how much of the coincidence between the tweets and the Facebook posts can be exactly the same people just presenting the same information in both platforms at the same time. Do you have any idea how to control for that in order to avoid duplicating observations?
So the Facebook posts are not from people. The Facebook posts are specifically from those top 15 news agencies. So it's not really a question of if the disinformation actors are playing into that, because they're from specific news agency accounts. So that's what we were looking at. So that was our way to sort of concentrate specifically on news discourse in the US rather than having that influence come into play.
Did you consider bot tweets?
For this analysis, we did not, but going into it, the bots, I think the last study that came out made up more than 50% of that Twitter data set. So we didn't consider that for this project, but obviously for future analyses, that would be a major point to address, because a lot of the data set is actually repetition of either the same or similar tweets. And I'm sure that you're working with this data set. So that would be something that would need to be addressed and sussed out. And I also think that that can sort of come into our modeling flow and how that works in the future,